Okay, so I'll briefly introduce you to the rest of the participants and panelists. So David is a mechanical engineer by profession, and he's particularly interested in renewable energy technologies, green growth economy, business and technical advisory experience to SMEs, especially in those aforementioned sectors. He is currently the CEO of the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya, a membership body and CSO that represents the clean cooking stakeholders' interests, including advocating for conducive business environment for the adoption of clean cooking across the country, capacity building of the sector, and promotion of adoption of clean cooking through awareness. He was previously with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, among his other experiences. So today he's going to give us, share with us insights of the National Cooking Sector Study, which he was part of. And he's part of the questions he'll be responding to include highlighting the reasons for and various aspects that were involved in the study, whether the study addresses aspects of black carbon, and what are the insights from the study that are relevant to the Kenya SLCP project. So I hope that by now we are familiar with the term SLCP, the short-lived climate pollutant. So David, please go ahead and share with us what you got. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to be part of this webinar today. As mentioned, I'm David Maina Jugi, working with the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya, and I will be sharing with you today some of the highlights from the clean cooking sector study that we carried out in 2018 and 2019 in partnership with the Ministry of Energy. So I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so briefly, I will introduce the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya, or CCAK. As rightly mentioned, it's a sector association and CSO that represents the interests of the clean cooking stakeholders in the country, and has members from both the private and public sectors, and works in government to promote clean cooking in the country. And that's our mission and vision. Now, with regard to the study, maybe just to give some highlights and background to the problem and reason for the study is that most Kenyans still use wood fuel as a primary source of fuel. These biomass, coupled with inefficiently designed cook stoves, emit high levels of pollutants, notably the PM 2.5 and the others, and black carbon, which consequently creates the risk of developing acute respiratory tract infections in young children, women, and then also older people, as has been highlighted in the previous presentation. Now, over 38 million people in Kenya, that is 80% of the population, are at risk of household air pollution due to cooking, and also say maybe lighting, using solid fuels or polluting fuels. And this results in more than 21,000 premature deaths and other health related challenges, as has been highlighted with regard to the respiratory system. And this affects mainly women and young children, and of course the elderly. Also, with regard to deforestation and climate change, clean cooking or household cooking is a major contributor to this, and therefore shifting to cleaner and more efficient cooking solutions not only helps to reduce the rate of forest degradation and deforestation, but also to keep in line with recent government policy of reducing our dependency on charcoal for primary cooking, and actually the target to achieve universal access to modern and clean cooking tech, for the country by 2028, which is 2 years ahead of the global target of 2030. Of course, this requires a lot of measures to be taken now. So the clean cooking sector study was carried out in 2018 and finalized in last year. We did this study together with the Ministry of Energy, and the objective was basically to determine the state of clean cooking in Kenya at household level by establishing the baseline indicators, raising the conceptual understanding of the sector among the stakeholders, and attracting strategic private and public investments, and also as a guideline to the process of policy formulation. So the study basically was carried out in all 47 counties, just for you to know, and had more than that 500 participating persons across the country, and looked at all technologies that are available from biomass to other clean technologies such as electricity and clean cooking. Some key findings that I would like to highlight from this study, and maybe also to give some context, a lot of this data has been collaborated by another study carried out by the World Bank using the multi-tier framework, and these studies found out that around 59% of households use the three-stove open fire, and these are what 7.3 million households. I mean, which is quite high, and of course in the rural areas that is a bit higher. 71% of households in Kenya also use a type of fuel wood stove as their primary or secondary stove, and 92% in rural areas. We have the Kenya ceramic jiko, which is the most widely used charcoal stove, with 4.2 million households using. And then also to give a perspective of the kind of market we are looking at, the market of charcoal, which is mostly used in the country by most households, is around 68 billion per year. So adoption of clean cooking solutions can, the study found that can mitigate around 18% of total emissions for Kenya, which is significant in achieving our goals. And of course, I've highlighted that more than 21,000 deaths can be attributed to household air pollution, mainly due to the way we cook. And this is just a snapshot of the multi-tier framework energy access Kenya report by the World Bank, which showed that more than 6% of households in Kenya, spend 7.5 hours per week on fuel collection and preparation. And of course, that affects livelihoods in many ways, because it means lost opportunities in education and increasing incomes. It also found out that most households, more than 2/3 of households, use what you can call tier 0 kind of technologies to cook. And around 20% of these households are the ones that use what you can call tier 3 and above. These are the cleaner cooking technologies, LPG, electricity, ethanol, or very efficient biomass stoves. Of course, women, cooking and women are very much related, because cooking is highly women's activity in Kenya. And you can see the number of minutes per day that on average, that women spend in the kitchen 78 minutes per day in the cooking area. Of course, compared to 62 minutes per day spent by male adults, meaning that the problem is, as highlighted in the previous presentation, is for both genders, but definitely more for women and, of course, children. And yeah, I think the rest I've mentioned. So again, another snapshot of the OTTR framework report on achieving gender parity in access to energy, highlighting that there is need to have specific financing mechanisms that enable both men and women to access energy services. And then, of course, this is both lighting and cooking. The study highlighted a few barriers that I would like to highlight. Of course, access to finance is common. It's a major barrier to along the value chain, both for the growth of the businesses in the sector, as well as consumer financing, because some of the high-tech technologies are a bit expensive. Of course, we have some policy and regulatory barriers, which I think some of which the project is looking at, to make sure that we have an appropriate and enabling environment for investment in the sector, and also uptake to drive up demand. Of course, market intelligence and awareness, and I would say even data on things like the pollutants we are looking at is lacking. A lot of market information does not exist and needs to be collected. And looking at how we can be able to better categorize this sector, and for example, the pollutions, the economic impact on households would really help government to prioritize this sector. Of course, we have technological barriers in designing new, better, innovative, consumer-centric kind of solutions. We have supply chain barriers in the supply of various technologies like LPG, or even electricity and other technologies, ethanol, because of the supply of ethanol itself. And then that now goes to the other, which is the fuel-specific barriers that we have along the supply chain that affect the adoption of these technologies. I think I've alluded to this, the design of problem-driven approaches, having the consumer in mind and all that. Of course, finance or fiscal incentives for the sector. This year, the government has introduced VAT and duty on cooking, cookers, improved cook stoves, biogas, which of course affects the uptake and the demand of these technologies in the sector. And considering the impact this has on livelihoods, on the environment, I think there's need, of course, for more data for Treasury and government to understand what we are dealing with here, and the health, of course, impacts that are there. So this is still an ongoing challenge, and we're trying to get government to return the sector to the status we were in before this July. Of course, prioritize solutions and interventions. I think we've seen the uptake of LPG has grown, and the study has shown that from 10 years ago, the increase in the usage of LPG has grown by 6 times to 19%. Some studies say up to maybe 30%, but it shows that because government prioritized this solution and provided some incentives, the uptake went up significantly. And we believe that if that is done for other technologies and fuels, the same can be achieved. Support for technology advancement and business development, of course, that is what CCK and other stakeholders are doing. CCK has also been trying to better coordinate the sector, which for quite a while has not been better coordinated to generate the data and also get government prioritizing the sector, and of course sustaining that market intelligence, which is basically data that can feed into policy making. Of course, with regard to the short-lived climate pollutants, the study did not go into details of measurements and all that. However, a few things were highlighted, that household air pollution is a major contributor to the short-lived climate pollutants, and that over that 6 million people can have experienced the effect of unclean cooking. And this has to do with these pollutants. And it is estimated that introduction and adoption of clean cooking solutions can reduce the annual disease burden from 49% to 20%. And I think, as I highlighted in the previous, by the previous presenter, these diseases, because even the data on the number of deaths, I would say it's maybe on the conservative side, be higher, and other long-term health impacts are quite high. So this is a major saving for government if on health, if the country was to move, or households were to move to cleaner cooking. And as explained, the WHO explains that inefficient use and burning of biomass is among the main causes of SLCP emission that persists in the atmosphere for long, and that significant reductions of these emissions could generate very rapid climate benefits, helping to reduce near-term climate change by as much as 0.5 degrees before 2050. Kenya commits to shift to clean cooking through development of efficient cooking solutions, thereby projecting an abatement potential of 7.3 metric tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030 as a means of mitigating climate change. And for us to achieve that, we need to increase the uptake of clean cooking. I think there's a lot that we can do through this project and collaborate. And as I have highlighted, some information that maybe is also good, I didn't manage to put in the presentation, but I thought is also important, is that the AMREF University, we've partnered with the AMREF University to drive research and address the data gaps in the market or in the sector, and also the Aga Khan University. And the AMREF University has partnered with the University of Liverpool and Clean Air Africa, and they will be setting up a lab at the university that will have the equipment that were mentioned in the previous presentation, and that will be used to collect data on these pollutants, and also to also collect data on health impacts that would be good to understand. And yeah, I'll invite you to visit our website for more information. We've also done a study on the same for institutions, and you know the impact is also not good and needs to be addressed. So thank you very much for your time, and yeah, I'd like to end it at that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, sir, for the elaborate presentation. I have not seen any question directed to you yet. So maybe we can address the pending questions that were directed to Professor Wilkester. So I see there's one here from Alice Kaudir. She's asking, what has prevented the action of at a large scale impact regarding policies? And can the sensors be managed by households without technical experts? Professor Wilkester.
Thank you, Claudia, for the questions. The sensors can be managed by households without technical experts. It is possible to do that. because they don't need a lot of expertise. Once they are mounted, then they will give readings. So it is possible to do that. What has prevented action on large-scale impacts? It is because for a long time, there hasn't been much legislation on indoor air pollution because it is my space. But then as more and more insight is gained into indoor air pollution and the burden of disease that arises from indoor air pollution, then as people become more and more aware, and when legislation comes into place, and when gadgets become available to measure indoor air pollutants, and when things become much easier to access, like the last presenter has indicated that they hope to set up a lab and have these gadgets. And like I indicated, these gadgets are now going to become more available. Then with more data, it is possible to set up mechanisms of dealing with this problem. So I think this is a good way to start dealing with this situation. As more and more people come into this space, then it will become much easier for legislation to be put in place and for policies for indoor air pollution to be effected. Also, sensitization. Ignorance sometimes may limit some of the actions that even government can be able to undertake based on this. So when people will become more aware and appreciate that maybe some of the diseases that we're experiencing are rising rates in our households, where settings are supposed to be healthy, where we are supposed to be relaxing and rewinding for the day and re-energizing, then I think this is going to be much better. And just to bring in the issue of COVID, because mainly it expresses as a respiratory illness, you can imagine maybe if indoor pollution exacerbates even some of the effects or the reactions or the way COVID-19 may present themselves. Now that people are being told to, most people, they are isolating themselves in their homes. How healthy are those homes where they're isolating themselves? Maybe they are contributing towards even the comorbidity that they are talking about. Maybe it is not only the diabetes and hypertension, maybe it is the indoor air pollution that could also be bringing in comorbidity. So I think now there is more space, there are more things that we need to look at when it comes to indoor air pollution. So it means there's still a lot that needs to be done when it comes to indoor air pollution. So I think policies need to be informed by data that needs to be collected by researchers. Thank you.
Sorry, you can hear me now. There's a question for David. So Anonymous asks, what opportunities does electric cooking present for urban areas as a clean cooking solution based on the high rates of electricity penetration in these areas? Are you in a position to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, there are a lot of people who are looking into electric cooking at the moment. We have an ongoing study supported by DFID on how how and what the perception is out there on electric cooking and whether it can be a solution for clean cooking. I would say at the moment the technologies are a bit expensive because clean cooking, you are either using the coil or the electric pan to cook, and electricity cost is a bit high in the country, or you're using gadgets that are efficient, like pressure cookers. Now, I think the average cost of a pressure cooker is, electric pressure cooker is, I think, what, $80, $80 to $100, which is not accessible to most people. However, it has been seen to be actually more or cheaper than even using LPG. So it's an interesting thing, and I know a number of people are already using it. Most of us maybe have pressure cookers in the house. If you don't use them, just know that it's actually cheaper than LPG, and that you could be saving a few coins by using it. Of course, we have induction plates that are used for commercial, even household use. I think the issue of electric cooking in urban areas is an opportunity and should be explored. We look at the study to advise on the policy measures that need to be taken. Of course, the addition of VAT to cookers will affect the uptake or increase the cost of doing so. We also need to look at issues of consumer financing. How do we finance consumers for these technologies? And I think fiscal incentives or tax breaks, basically, reducing taxes on these products will be key in promotion of adoption of these technologies. So yes, electric cooking is an option for especially urban areas where electricity is more available and it's not as erratic as in some of the rural areas, and also maybe something that can be looked at for off-grid areas where we have mini grids that are coming up, and the issues of productive use of energy. As we take electricity to the rural areas, can we also introduce these technologies to these households so that they can uptake? And of course, that has a financing and awareness aspect to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Then Philip asks, this question is directed to Professor Elkista. How robust is the data collection using the different methodologies, given the dynamic interactions between elements related to cooking and diesel-based vehicular emissions, as well as exposure outside of the household that has a significant impact on health, especially for communities located adjacent to roadsides? Yeah, so this question was posted in the Q&A icon for further reference.
Yeah, that is an aspect that can bring about limitations when it comes to analysis. So definitely, even when you are undertaking sampling, there is bound to be interference from also other sources of black carbon. And like I indicated, black carbon also, it acts as a vehicle where even other pollutants are there too, other volatile organic compounds are there too. So that's why I indicated that there are certain limitations. But of course, you can control for that. You can control for that, where it can be burnt, fuel can be burnt under controlled conditions. If you really want to know how much
We lost you.
is being emitted, inputs from the external air, then it means that is the real situation as it is. And that is the actual exposure. And the actual exposure is what is bound to affect the health of the individuals who are living in that household. So that actually gives the correct picture, the correct exposure that household members face. So if it is maybe on how black carbon contributes towards climate change, that can be a limitation. But then if it is about indoor air pollution, then definitely you want to capture, the situation as it is, and it gives the correct indication on indoor air pollution. Uh, so, but then as we come up with more smart gadgets for measuring indoor air pollution, then it is possible to also deal with those limitations. So to me, that may not be a limitation, it's just an indication of the collective, the totality of all the pollutants that get into the indoor space, both whatever that is being generated indoors and what is coming in from the outdoor environment.
Thank you very much. So we'll go to the next session where we have two panelists, Mr. Peter Maneno and Mr. Okay, let's start with this, Mr. Peter Maneno. Are you there, Mr. Peter Maneno? He is an engineer at the Ministry of Energy and a member of the Climate Change Unit. He is experienced in greenhouse gas inventories using IPCC software, particularly energy and industrial processes and product use, that's IPPU. And he participated in the compilation of the third National Greenhouse Gas Inventory, where he was the energy sector lead. For this session, he's going to address black carbon emission inventories. So a brief description, or the questions he'll be responding to include how will you, or have rural households' black carbon emissions been discussed as a significant contributor of black carbon at the national and international level? And he also made comments on the shortcomings in the black carbon inventories by the developing nations. Other question is, do you think there's need for the development of authoritative emission inventory guidance on SLCPs? Then what are the gaps, challenges, and opportunities that exist? Lastly, what are the options for Kenya to incorporate targets, policies, and actions on short-lived climate pollutants into the updated nationally determined contributions? So I invite you, Engineer Peter Maneno, and feel free to ask questions under the Q&A icon or in the chat box. And I encourage the panelists to also try and respond to some of them in the chat. I can see there's some interactions that are already taking place. Yes, let's keep interacting in the chat boxes. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yeah, as you've been told, my name is Peter Maneno. I work for the Ministry of Energy. Yes, I hope you can see my screen now. And I'll make a presentation on addressing black carbon emission inventories and opportunities of including black carbon in the updated NDCs. So for a start, I'll briefly comment on the GHG inventory process in Kenya. So as we probably know, paragraph 1 of Article 4 of UNFCCC requires parties to develop, update, and submit to the Conference of Parties national inventories of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Kenya ratified the convention in 1994 and has already met its obligation through submission of its initial national communication in 2005 and the second national communication in 2015. The inventory that we'll focus on in this presentation is the third national communication, and it reports on the GHG emissions by sources and removal by sinks for the period 1995 to 2015, following the 2006 IPCC guidelines. The inventory covers the 5 sectors, namely energy, which includes transport, IPPU, that is the industrial processes and product use, agriculture, forest and land use, and waste. You estimate emissions by getting the product of the activity data and the emission factors. The activity data that we use is mostly from reliable sources, and for us, we mainly relied on the published data from the National Bureau of Statistics and other projects that could be verified. The current inventory used the 2006 IPC guidelines, and calculations were made on the software, on the IPC software. The gases covered under the guidelines are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, nitrogen trifluoride, trifluoromethyl sulfur pentafluoride, halogenated ethers, and other halocarbons that are not covered by the Montreal Protocol. So on the short-lived climate pollutants, we know that these are powerful climate forces that remain in the atmosphere for a much shorter period than carbon dioxide. Yet their potential to warm the atmosphere can be many times greater. Certain short-lived climate pollutants, as we have heard, are dangerous air pollutants that have harmful effects for people, ecosystems, and agricultural productivity. There are 4 main SLCPs, which are methane, hydrofluorocarbons, tropospheric ozone, and black carbon. The first 2 were estimated in the inventory, that is methane and hydrofluorocarbons. And the other 2, that is the ozone and the black carbon, were not estimated. From the inventory, it was found, as is displayed, that the key sources of emissions are land converted to grassland, which was responsible for 17% of the total emissions in 2015. This was followed by enteric fermentation, land converted to cropland, as they follow as you see in the table. According to the good practice guidelines, you rank the emissions, the key categories, while including LULUCF, that is land use change and forestry, and with the exclusion of LULUCF. This is because it is usually such an overbearing category, and it might end up making some categories not be, although significant, not be highlighted. So without LULUCF, enteric fermentation was found to be the leading source of GHG emissions, which enteric fermentation for methane, CH4, which contributed 36%. As we mentioned, some of these short-lived climate pollutants have a much higher global warming potential than CO2. Methane has a global warming potential of about 25%, 25 times that of CO2, whereas the hydrofluorocarbons range from 124 to almost 15,000 times. The Kenya greenhouse gas share by gas type in 2015 is as seen here, where 57% was from CO2. Methane contributed about a quarter of the total, and N2O, nitrous oxide, about 17%. Hydrofluorocarbons, whereas in this year and in the inventory seem to have had a very small contribution, is a point of concern because of the rate of growth. About, there's been over 300% growth over the last, say, 10 years. About 75% of all the hydrofluorocarbons produced in the world are used in refrigeration and air conditioning. And we know as people get more prosperous, as the standards of living improve, then refrigeration and air conditioning becomes an option. So we need to monitor and make proactive interventions in time. Coverage of the short-lived climate pollutants in the GHG inventory. From the figures presented previously, it is evident that these have been covered, although not entirely, because we see that the black carbon and the tropospheric ozone have not been estimated. The key sources for the SLCPs is agriculture, where we've seen enteric fermentation ranks very high. There is energy. There's a lot of quite some methane from energy sources, and industrial processes and product use, where all the HFCs that we have estimated are estimated under that sector. So when a source is identified as key, it is placed, emphasis is placed so that data collection is improved, because small errors have big impacts. Kenya has made significant improvement in forestry and livestock sectors, and we hope to build on that and have better data, a more accurate inventory across the other sectors in energy, IPPU, and waste. Then emissions from combustion of biomass in residential sector, for instance, was a key category in the energy sector. What I presented was the key categories in the whole inventory, but each sector did its own key category analysis and identified what was key for that sector. So methane emissions from combustion of biomass in residential areas was found to be a key category in the energy sector. This came in second after road transportation, CO2. What are the shortcomings with regards to the coverage of short-lived climate pollutants in the GHG inventory? Black carbon emissions, we have said, are not covered in the inventory because the guidelines do not provide for its estimation. The guidelines that, the IPC guidelines, tropospheric ozone was also not emitted, because using the formula that we've said, that is the activity data times the emission factors, it's not possible to estimate tropospheric ozone because it is not emitted directly, but is formed when precursor gases react in the presence of sunlight. Some of these precursor gases are the nitrogen oxides, and methane is also is the biggest precursor gas for the formation of tropospheric ozone. Biomass data is not continuously collected nor disaggregated, affecting the accuracy of estimation of emissions. Biomass, as much as it is the biggest single source of energy for the country, the data is not together. The data is scarce, it's scattered, and not very reliable. This because the data that we have, because that whole sector is largely unregulated and devolved to the to the smallest possible sectors. It goes to the household level, to the, so getting data that we can reliably say that the errors and uncertainties are within the acceptable range is a big problem, and it is in fact been identified as one of the areas for improvement. That is just getting the data on totals. But as we have heard in the previous presentations, even biomass is not the same. Even wood is not the same. Wood from one tree is not necessarily the same as wood from another tree. It's not the same as wet wood and dry wood are not the same. The technology that is used in the consumption, the big industrial wood fuel boilers and the household, the 3-stone open fire cook stove, even when using the same exact type of wood, will not yield the same outputs, because there could, in the industrial boilers, they could invest in blowers and ensure that there is sufficient oxygen and a high efficiency of burning. The preparation for the fuel, how it is it preheated like they do at industry? Is it chopped into small pieces? Those are factors that really affect the accuracy of the inventory and lead to a lot of uncertainty. Strategies to address the short-lived climate pollutants in the country. The Kenya National Determined Contribution prioritizes measures to mitigate climate change, including reduction in SLCPs. The NCAP 2018-2022 prioritizes clean cooking under priority area 7. Energy policy prioritizes the addressing of SLCPs, most of from the household cooking sector. Kenya is a member of the Clean Climate and Clean Air Coalition to reduce short-lived climate pollutants. So maybe I can mention a few of the interventions by the Ministry of Energy. We have the last mile connectivity program that is to enhance the connectivity of Kenya's electricity grid. This will make options like we have discussed in the last presentation, where there is cooking using electricity. They'll become an option once people are connected. We have the COSAP, which is, will lead to development of electricity mini grids in 14 underserved counties, and solar home systems. Also, COSAP has a component of clean cooking solution where it targets about 150,000 clean stoves. The promotion of biogas use, the Ministry of Energy is building institutional and household biogas demonstration centers or demonstration biogas units for demonstration. This should help get more people to adopt this technology. Promotion of renewable energy sources of electricity like geothermal, wind, solar, because we know that the thermal fired power plants, like the diesel fired power plants, also will lead to formation of black carbon and other SLCPs. The promotion of energy efficiency, energy audits, and equipment rating will reduce the amount of energy that has to be generated, and this will end up leading to a lot less pollution. Data has been identified as the biggest challenge in this space. There's need to carry out an updated biomass energy survey. There's need to improve data collection in the biomass subsector. And the data should be segregated so that it's not just totals, but it's segregated in a way that it can guide and be useful in advising policy and intervention. There is need for continuous modeling of SLCPs in the country so as to get a clear picture of the situation and thus institute effective interventions. Interventions might be proposed, but without the proper data, without the correct data, without that, then they'll likely not be effective. There are multiple benefits of interventions against short-lived climate pollutants, and this should make it a much easier sell, because short-lived climate pollutants interventions are felt quickly at the point of use. When there is less black carbon, less soot from production of any, by using, say, an improved cooking option, it's easy to see, and the buy-in can be much faster. We have a robust data collection infrastructure through the ministry, like you saw how the Ministry of Energy collaborated with CCAK to the cooking sector study. The National Bureau of Statistics, the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. This data collection infrastructure, if we can leverage on that infrastructure and close the data gaps, we'll be able to close the data gaps much faster. There's a wide expert knowledge base from previous projects, the GHG inventory, the low emission development strategies, in academia, in NGOs. If now that is an opportunity that, if channeled well, can enable quick and effective achievement of interventions against SLCPs. County governments, community-based organizations, NGOs, academia, ministries, all are undertaking various interventions in their space. This needs to be put together so that we can have a way forward. Thank you. That is my presentation, and I invite questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Maneno. Gonzaga is asking, Do we have any studies on SLPC or greenhouse gases from the horticulture or floriculture sector?
Right. Uh, Not by the Ministry of Energy. There is a lot of work that is going on by various agencies. So I cannot authoritatively say whether there is any study or not. But by the Ministry of Energy, we do not have such a study.
And maybe to add into his question, is there a possibility that the current energy audits that take place in industrial scopes include this kind of provisions, or is there any element of advocacy on that angle that they would introduce this kind of scopes?
The energy audits have a threshold where for establishments that consume above 180,000 units per year, those were mandated by law to undertake energy audits and institute energy conservation measures. Now, we hope that, because at the end of the day, the energy audits are set to benefit the proprietor of the establishment. We hope that from the benefits that will be accrued in these establishments, then other people whom it is not mandatory to undertake such audits will see the need, will seek to get the benefit of such audits and the interventions that will lead to efficient utilization of energy.
Great, thanks for that. There are several comments in the chat box. I see Alice is saying that the low contribution of HFCs can be associated with efforts by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry to change the refrigerants used in refrigerators and cold rooms in the country. Dr. Richard Muita comments to say that the gaps on black carbon and tropospheric ozone are important for this project and the country's national emissions inventory. However, there's some atmospheric ozone observations from Kenya Meteorological Department, which may be an entry point to updating the emissions inventory. And last but not least, Galas is asking, does the Ministry of Energy have any plans to improve on data collection?
Those are very good comments. Thank you. And for the question, does the Ministry of Energy have any plans to improve data collection? Yes, the Ministry of Energy has plans to improve data collection because data is what will inform any policy interventions that are going to be put forward. It will be foolhardy to propose anything or any intervention without any data that, without the requisite data coming from the inventory, the national inventory. We found a lot of gaps, which are some of the recommendations that have been put forward. And from that, we hope that a program will be put to seal those loopholes so that by the time we come to the next inventory, which will be beginning soon, we'll not run into similar problems.
Okay. Mariam asks, how will Kenya include SLCP in their NDC reporting? Which sectors are targeted? And then Philip asks, what opportunities does the clean energy NAMA present from a government perspective in regard to improved cook stoves and enhancing clean cooking solutions with the current update on the NDC? I think that is meant for Professor Wilkista. And there's a suggestion that we share the presentations. So over to you, Peter.
So on the question of how will Kenya include the SLCPs in the NDC reporting, there is the project right now for the NDC update. There's a consultant, I think it should be Climate Care, and they're taking views, and there's any comments and any sectors that can be improved to make the SLCPs, to make the NDCs more ambitious are welcome. The good thing with SLCPs is that many of them, the effects are local. The effect of ozone is more local. The effect of black carbon is more local. So interventions are an easier sell because any benefits are quick to accrue to the population that undertakes the intervention.
Thank you so much for that. I don't see any other questions in play. Is there any other comments that any of the panelists would like to address? I see we have around 10 more minutes. Anyone any addition, any subtraction? Is Professor Wilkista still there? All right, okay, so there have been a few takeaways from this session, which has been very eye-opening, even for myself, who is quite passionate about the clean cooking space in Sub-Sahara, and I see us making great progress. Before I hand over to the chair of the session, Mr. Arnold, I'd just like us to continue contributing in this space. Let's have more players in this space as well, because the extent to our efforts in advocacy is only as much as the efforts we put into reminding us all that the impacts are real. And even in this COVID time, the implications and the complications abound. So I see the webinar has been recorded. So if any of us would want to have further reference, Arnold is going to guide us on how to access this particular presentation. I'm very grateful to have been part of this session, of this interaction. I hope to interact and meet you all in the future. So over to you, Arnold.
Okay, thank you, Rehema, for moderating the plenary session. I want to thank everyone who joined us for today's webinar, mostly Professor Wilkista Moturi, David Njugi, and Peter Maneno for their amazing and insightful presentation and sharing the expertise that you have. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with the Kenya SLCP project team, I'll be sharing the email address for the project in the chat box. This is also to mention, as Reima has reiterated, that the webinar will be published in the project website and also in LinkedIn and YouTube. The presentations from all the speakers will also be shared to all the participants. I would also want to mention that we will have another webinar tomorrow addressing vehicular pollutants and the impacts on urban populations and the advantages of developing a baseline black carbon emissions inventory in Kenya. So it will happen same time, 10 a.m. Tomorrow. Invitations will be sent shortly to your emails. So if you would love to participate, so kindly join us. The speakers will be Dr. Adriana Mbandi, who's a senior fellow at Stockholm Environment Institute, Jen Okumu, who is in charge of mobility at United Nations Environment Program, Professor Michael Gatari from University of Nairobi, and Professor John Muthama. Once again, I want to thank all of you for participating in this webinar. Thank you so much.